He hadn't seen her in almost 3 years, not since she vanished without goodbye, leaving only silence where there had once been stolen glances, late-night whispers, and one unforgettable kiss. Henry Aldridge stood frozen in the doorway of the small Oregon art studio, his pulse deafening. The walls were lined with canvases, soft strokes, wild colors, but none of them mattered, because she was standing right there. Her back was turned. Her hand moved delicately over a half-finished painting. A small child, no older than 2, sat on the floor near her, drawing on a piece of scrap paper, humming softly to himself. Henry couldn't breathe, not because of the years of secrets between them, not even because seeing her again shattered every carefully constructed wall he had built since her disappearance. It was the child. He had his eyes. The boy looked up, curious but calm, the same serious stare Henry saw in the mirror every morning. And in that instant, every answer came crashing down on him like a truth he'd known all along but never dared admit. His voice trembled as he spoke, barely above a whisper. "Alira." She turned slowly. No startle, no panic, just quiet resignation in her gaze, like she'd always known this moment would come. For a moment, neither of them moved. She looked older, not aged, stronger, like a woman who had chosen solitude over scandal, peace over chaos. Henry stepped forward, his throat tightening. "Is he?" Alira glanced at the boy and gave the faintest nod. "His name is Luca." He fell to his knees, every barrier, every question breaking with him. Before we unfold this story of forbidden love, painful choices, and a second chance that no one saw coming, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Ross' Story Trail, because some stories don't just entertain, they change the way we see love, loyalty, and ourselves. The silence between them said everything. He didn't ask why she left. She didn't ask why he came, because deep down, they both knew. Henry had built a life measured in control, in carefully worded statements and strategic partnerships. He was the man who always did the right thing, even when it meant giving up what he wanted most. But when Alira vanished, she took more than his peace. She took the part of him that still felt alive. Now here she was, holding his entire world in the form of a small boy with dark curls and curious eyes. Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to? Not the crush that fades, not the longing you can silence, but the kind of love that keeps you up at night. That clings to your ribs like hunger. That makes you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, duty, even love itself. That was Alira. She wasn't just Celeste's younger sister. She was the fire he never saw coming, and the one woman he tried to forget, but never could. He had spent years pretending he'd chosen the right path, years walking red carpets, attending shareholder meetings, holding Celeste's hand like he belonged in that world. But every smile had felt like a lie, every vow rehearsed. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Alira. Her laugh, her defiance, the way she saw through him when everyone else only saw the polished surface. What do you do when doing the right thing feels like the biggest betrayal of your heart? He hadn't come to Oregon looking for her. He hadn't even known where to start. But the moment he saw that painting, the cliffside, the child, the colors only she could mix, he knew. This wasn't coincidence. This was a moment waiting to happen. Henry didn't know what to say. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? That he missed her every day? That for months after she vanished, he searched the world, hoping for a sign, some message, some closure. He had walked through his own wedding rehearsals like a man in someone else's suit, stared into mirrors and seen a version of himself he no longer recognized. He didn't touch her. Not yet. Alira shifted slightly, standing between him and the boy, protective, as she should be. "I didn't tell you," she finally said, "because I needed to be sure I could raise him without you." Her voice was calm, but the pain beneath it ran deep. "I thought if I told you, you'd come out of obligation, and I didn't want Luca growing up with a father who showed up because he had to, not because he chose to." Henry's throat tightened. He hadn't chosen her back then. Not really. He'd chosen comfort, status, appearances, and now all those things felt small in the face of this boy. This moment, this truth. "I'm not here out of obligation," he said finally. "I'm here because I never stopped choosing you, even when I tried not to." His voice cracked, and Alira's eyes wavered, just slightly. But still, she said nothing. Because love wasn't always enough. Not when it came tangled in betrayal, broken promises, and a family still healing from the damage they didn't dare name. He crouched low, locking eyes with Luca, his son. No DNA test could make this truth clearer. He saw it in the way the boy furrowed his brow, in the quiet strength in his expression. "Hi, buddy," he whispered, blinking back tears. "I'm Henry." Luca blinked up at him, studying him quietly. The room, once filled with brushstrokes and silence, now brimmed with something else: uncertainty, hope, and the impossible possibility of redemption. Elira turned toward the window, blinking rapidly as if holding herself together was the only thing keeping her upright. Outside, the afternoon light filtered softly through the glass, painting the floor in muted gold. The hum of the child's drawing pencil was the only sound between them. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Her words weren't angry, just tired, as though she'd fought this battle in her head 100 times before and already knew she couldn't win. Henry stepped closer, his voice steady but low. "I couldn't stay away." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, a press shot from a life that once defined him. The sharp suit, the empty eyes, the woman on his arm, who deserved better than a man already divided. He placed the photo on the table beside her brushes. "That man doesn't exist anymore," he said. "I left everything behind, the company, the board, the image, all of it." Elira's hands trembled slightly, her eyes darting toward the child, then back to Henry. "Why now? After everything?" He hesitated. Then, softly, "Because living without you felt like surviving, not living, and because I need to know if the damage we caused can ever become something good." Elira looked at him for a long moment. Her lips parted, but no words came. The story of their lives hung between them, unspoken, fragile, waiting. What if love could return after all the wrong turns? What if forgiveness isn't weakness, but the bravest thing two people can choose? Henry glanced at Luca again, the small hand gripping a crayon too tightly. He smiled through the ache. Maybe this was the beginning of a different kind of story, not one of forbidden passion, but of healing. And as the screen fades to black, a voiceover gently concludes, "Love doesn't always follow the rules. Sometimes it breaks them to remind us what truly matters." Henry Aldridge was the man every headline loved to write about. At just 34, he stood at the helm of Linwell Corporation, one of the most formidable names in international infrastructure. He was often called the architect of modern luxury, someone who didn't just build cities but sculpted their future. With his tailored suits, quiet authority, and an intuition that sliced through pretense, Henry moved through the world like someone who'd already won the game everyone else was still learning to play. He rarely raised his voice, yet people leaned in when he spoke. He didn't chase the spotlight, somehow it followed him. And tonight, it followed him straight into the Alvera family ballroom. The engagement party was a symphony of excess: velvet drapes, custom lighting, a guest list that included half of Congress and most of Manhattan's elite. Cameras flashed like starlight, each image carefully curated to frame the soon-to-be-married couple as royalty in waiting. Henry stood at the center of it all, Celeste Alvera on his arm. Celeste, every inch the ideal partner, elegant without being cold, well-versed in diplomacy and the social graces born from growing up in a political dynasty. Her smile was flawless, her timing rehearsed to perfection. She charmed senators and CEOs with equal grace. To the outside world, they were inevitable. Power paired with poise, a legacy in motion. But for Henry, every moment felt rehearsed. Like a script he was expected to perform night after night. He played the role well, but that was all it was. A role. He looked around the room, glasses clinking, faces nodding in approval. And somewhere inside him, a quiet thought rose like smoke. When did this become enough? He hadn't felt excitement in months. No curiosity, no mystery. Just expectations wrapped in luxury. A life built on order, but stripped of unpredictability. Celeste leaned in, her voice soft and precise. "They love you tonight." Henry gave a small smile. "They love the idea of me." She didn't notice the difference. Across the ballroom, the doorman moved to open the entrance again. A late guest stepped in. Henry barely turned his head, until he did. And in that single second, everything around him shifted. She wasn't supposed to be here. He hadn't heard she was back. There had been whispers, something about finishing a residency overseas, but he hadn't expected her to walk into this world again. Not like this. Elira Alvera entered quietly, without fanfare. No handlers, no cameras, no designer gown. She wore a simple burgundy dress, something unassuming, but tailored in a way that held your gaze longer than you meant to. Her hair fell in loose waves down her shoulders, and her eyes moved across the crowd with zero urgency, like she was looking at art, not people. Henry felt something twist in his chest. She hadn't seen him yet. He should have looked away, turned back to Celeste, focused on the life he had chosen. But he didn't. He couldn't. Elira looked up, and their eyes met. Her gaze didn't flinch. It held his like a question he wasn't ready to answer. Elira gave the slightest nod. Polite, measured. But her eyes, those eyes, carried something else entirely. A flicker of mischief, a hint of history, a spark he hadn't felt in years. And then she looked away. Just like that, moved through the crowd with easy grace, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing tray, pausing to greet a family friend near the corner column, like she hadn't just thrown a grenade into the middle of his carefully arranged life. Henry stood still, gripped by something he couldn't name. "Who's that?" someone nearby asked. Celeste answered without turning her head. "My sister." There was no edge in her tone, no jealousy or tension, just fact. And that, somehow, made it worse, because Celeste didn't see her sister as a threat. She didn't know. She couldn't feel the quiet crack running down the center of the man standing beside her. Henry forced his posture back into line. "She's changed," Celeste added. "Prague suited her." Henry gave a soft exhale. "Seems so." The room moved around him in a blur of congratulations and toasts, but Henry could feel the ground tilt slightly beneath his feet. He kept stealing glances, catching Elira in pieces, her smile, the way she brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, how she laughed too loudly for a room like this. She didn't belong here, not in this world of calculated grace and surface-level charm. But maybe that's what made her impossible to ignore. She was unpredictable, unfiltered, alive. He remembered the last time they spoke, briefly, years ago at a holiday, event filled with forced laughter and tense family dynamics. Even then, she had a way of slicing through the artifice with a single sentence, a comment that made you question whether you were really as in control as you thought. That night, she had said, "You look exhausted behind the eyes." He'd never forgotten it, because she was right. As the evening stretched on, he found himself drifting, physically and mentally. The hand holding Celeste's felt colder. His smile faded quicker. Every speech, every polite laugh, began to feel like static noise, until he caught sight of Elira again, this time near the terrace, half silhouetted by the city lights. Alone, sipping her drink, eyes distant, as if the entire party was a foreign language she no longer bothered translating. Henry excused himself. Celeste was busy speaking to a councilman and didn't protest. He moved across the floor slowly, weaving through donors and distant relatives, keeping his movements casual. But in his chest something pounded, something restless and sharp and stupid. When he reached the terrace door, she didn't turn, didn't speak, just raised her glass slightly and said, "That was a long stare for a man about to marry my sister." Henry's breath caught, just briefly. He stepped out beside her, the city stretching beyond them in silent witness. "Elira, you said my name like it still means something." He didn't answer, because it did. It meant more than it ever should have. "I wasn't sure you'd show up," he said finally. "I almost didn't." She took another sip, but Celeste begged, said it was important, said she missed me. A pause. "She meant it," Elira added, her voice quieter now, which made it worse. Henry looked at her then, really looked. She seemed older, sharper, not worn down but distilled, as if the years had burned away everything unnecessary and left only the raw truth of who she was. He wanted to ask what Prague had been like, what she'd painted, if she ever thought of him. But none of those questions felt safe, so instead, he said the only thing that came to him. "You look—" "Don't," she cut in. "Not cruel, just tired. I'm not here to complicate things, Henry. This is Celeste's night, her life, her future." She turned fully to face him. "You already chose." That landed like a weight in his chest, because he had, and it had seemed right on paper. But looking at her now, he wasn't so sure the paper mattered anymore. The Aldridge estate in the Hamptons was built to impress, marble staircases, glass-walled sitting rooms, and private beach access. But beneath the tailored elegance was a quiet rhythm of old habits, morning tea on the veranda, long walks through trimmed gardens, and curated summer weekends packed with the right kind of guests. This year, one guest changed everything. Celeste insisted Alira join them for the season. She framed it as a chance to reconnect. "You've been away so long," she'd said. "We hardly see each other anymore." Henry didn't protest. He couldn't. To question it would raise suspicion. To decline it would seem cold. So, Alira arrived, 2 weeks after the engagement party, with a single suitcase, a sketch pad, tucked under her arm, and a guarded smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Henry saw her for the first time that summer on the back lawn. She was barefoot in the grass, balancing a mug in one hand, her other shading her face from the late morning sun. Celeste was giving her a tour of the grounds, pointing out renovations and flower beds, proud of her domain. Alira nodded along politely, but Henry could tell her mind was elsewhere. That afternoon, she chose the garden house as her space. It was a small structure tucked behind the hedges, once used as a reading room by Henry's late grandmother. Overgrown ivy clung to the outside walls, but the interior was still sunlit and quiet, ideal for painting. Henry watched from the study window as she opened all the windows and dragged a small table into the center of the room. She moved with purpose, not hurried, not hesitant, just distant enough to drive him crazy. The days moved slowly after that. Henry spent mornings reviewing corporate affairs and afternoons attending to calls from the board, though he found his attention fraying. He'd step out for air and find himself wandering in the direction of the garden house, always telling himself it was just a walk, just air. But every time he passed by and saw her through the open window, hair tied up, brush in hand, sleeves rolled to her elbows, he lingered a little longer. They spoke rarely at first. Short greetings in passing, comments over dinner, the occasional exchange during walks with Celeste and her mother. But it wasn't until the 5th evening that things shifted. Celeste had gone into the city for a fundraiser. Henry remained behind, citing business. The house was quieter than usual. He wandered out to the back patio, drawn once again toward the faint glow of light still spilling from the garden house. The door was slightly ajar. He knocked once, softly. "Come in," Alira said without looking up. Henry stepped inside. The scent of oil paint and lavender soap lingered in the air. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open sketchbooks and color swatches. She wore a loose white t-shirt smudged with streaks of ochre and deep blue. He tried not to stare. "You're working late," he said. "I lose track of time when I'm here." "You always did," he replied, then immediately regretted how familiar it sounded. She looked up, surprised by the softness in his tone. "You remember that?" He nodded. "I remember everything," he almost said, but didn't. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes scanning the canvas in progress. It was abstract. Stark lines, shadowed reds, a kind of movement captured in stillness, turmoil contained. "You paint like you're arguing with something," he said. Alira smirked. "Aren't we all?" Henry sat down across from her on the floor, legs crossed, careful not to disrupt the layout of brushes and half-finished ideas. "I don't think I've ever seen this side of you," he said. "What side is that?" she asked, dipping her brush into a muted orange. "The one that doesn't ask for permission." Alira raised an eyebrow, amused. "You must not have been paying attention." Henry laughed, low and genuine, the kind of laugh that snuck up on him, caught off guard. It had been a long time since something felt unplanned. He looked around the room, taking in the scattered sketches taped to the walls. "You've changed this place. Places like this don't need much," she said. "Just someone willing to use them." There was silence for a beat. Not uncomfortable, just full. Then she asked, "Why didn't you go with Celeste tonight?" He hesitated, then told the truth. "I didn't feel like being congratulated." Alira tilted her head. Strange answer for someone living out everyone's version of success. Henry's eyes dropped to the paint-smeared floorboards. "Maybe that's the problem. I don't know if it's mine anymore." Alira didn't respond immediately. She looked at him closely, as if weighing whether to believe him. Finally, she said, "You know, you used to be sharp, focused, but now you look like you're walking through someone else's movie." Henry smirked. "You're still brutally honest. I've been away from polite circles. Honesty's easier when you stop worrying about how it sounds." There was something about the way she said it, flat, but not cruel, like she'd learned to live without apology, like she no longer filtered herself for anyone's comfort. He admired that. He envied it. As the night deepened, so did their conversation. They talked about Prague, its quiet streets, the solitary hours in studios, the way foreign cities allowed you to be unknown. They talked about art, about memory, about how grief can hide in routine, and when Alira laughed, truly laughed, it broke something open inside him. "You should come back here more often," she said, nudging him lightly with her foot. "To the garden house. To yourself." He paused, caught off guard. "Maybe I forgot how." Alira didn't push. She just nodded, as if that was answer enough. Eventually, she stood and stretched, arms over her head. "I should clean up." Henry made no move to leave. He looked at the canvas again, then back at her. "You're different," he said. "So, are you?" He didn't know if it was the low light, or the scent of turpentine mixed with her perfume, or the months of quiet longing. He never allowed himself to name, but the air between them felt charged in a way that made standing still feel dangerous. He took a step toward the door, paused. "Good night, Alira. Good night, Henry." She didn't watch him leave. The next morning they pretended nothing had shifted. Over breakfast, Alira sat beside Celeste, asking about wedding floral designs and honeymoon destinations. Henry read through financial briefings and nodded where appropriate, but occasionally their eyes would meet, and linger a second too long. By the fourth evening, it was Henry who brought the coffee. He knocked on the garden house door holding 2 cups, both without cream, he remembered. Alira raised an eyebrow when she saw him. "What's this?" "Peace offering." "For what?" "For being engaged to your sister." She snorted, took the cup. "You think coffee makes that less awkward?" "No, but I'm hoping caffeine earns me 10 minutes of conversation." Alira opened the door wider. "You've got 5. They sat again, closer this time. "Do you think love should always follow the rules? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this emotional roller coaster, hit the like button. It helps our stories reach more hearts like yours. It became a pattern, one neither of them acknowledged, yet both followed. Henry would wander down to the garden house just after dinner, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with wine, once with nothing but the excuse that the air inside was too still. Alira stopped pretending to be surprised. They talked, at first about nothing, then about everything. Some evenings were filled with laughter, sharp and irreverent. Others were quieter, more thoughtful. It wasn't flirtation, not overtly, but it hovered between them, unspoken. One night, as Alira adjusted a canvas, her hand brushed against his. Neither of them moved. Henry looked down at their hands, then up at her. "Sorry," she said, pulling away. "Don't be," he replied. Too quickly. She gave him a long look, then stepped back. That silence said more than either of them would admit. The next weekend, a few family friends joined them at the estate. Henry tried to keep busy, joining conversations about market trends and upcoming mergers, but his focus slipped. He watched Alira out of the corner of his eye as she laughed with one of the guests, a sculptor from Paris. The man leaned in when she spoke. Alira smiled at something he said, really smiled. Henry's jaw tightened. Later that evening, he found her alone by the pool, sketchbook open on her lap. "You looked like you were having fun," he said, sitting beside her. She glanced sideways. "Is that a question or a comment?" He didn't answer. "You know," she added, flipping a page, "you don't have to keep showing up down here." "I know." "Then why do you—" Henry looked at her, carefully. "Because you remind me of the parts of me I stopped listening to." Alira held his gaze. Something shifted, something fragile and electric. She closed her sketchbook. "That's a dangerous thing to say." "I know that too." One night, after another long conversation that left them both lingering too close to something unspeakable, Henry stood to leave. She followed him to the door. The air was heavy between them, dense with things they couldn't name out loud. He reached for the doorknob. Alira spoke first, her voice quiet but steady. "This can't happen." Henry didn't turn around. "I know." But he didn't walk away immediately. He stood there, hands still on the door, like someone trying to leave a dream they didn't want to wake from. When he finally stepped out, she stayed at the door long after it closed. The kitchen was quiet. Not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a long evening after the laughter has faded and the guests have gone home. The kind where every sound feels magnified. The clink of glass, the soft hum of the dishwasher, footsteps against polished tile. Henry stood near the sink, sleeves rolled, rinsing out wine glasses. He hadn't expected to be here this late, much less doing dishes. But Celeste had left early with her mother, claiming a headache and offering a tired smile before retreating upstairs. That left Elira. And him. She moved around the space with easy familiarity, barefoot, drying plates with a soft white towel. Her hair was tied up, a few loose strands brushing her cheek. She wore a gray shirt knotted at the waist and pajama pants that looked too soft to be formal. Henry didn't look at her directly, but he felt her in the room. Every step, every breath. The overhead lights were dim. Outside, the windows blurred with streaks of moisture. Neither of them said much. The tension didn't announce itself. It settled slowly. A change in the air. An awareness of how close they stood. How quiet the house had become. She passed him a plate. Their fingers brushed. It lingered longer than it should have. Henry swallowed hard, focused on the water, the sponge in his hand. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice low. "I know," Elira replied, "but I'm here." That answer wasn't about the dishes. He set the last glass aside, turned off the faucet. The sound of running water faded, replaced by something else, a quiet stillness that seemed to pull the air tighter. Elira leaned back against the counter, arms folded, watching him. "You've been quiet all night," she said. "So have you. Difference is," she added, "I'm used to silence." Henry dried his hands, turned to face her. The space between them suddenly felt much smaller. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes it harder to do the right thing." A long beat passed. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, "Do you still think there is a right thing?" He looked at her, fully this time. No pretense, no guarded expression. "I'm trying to," he said. Her eyes dropped for a moment, then lifted again. "You've always been good at pretending what you feel doesn't matter." "That's not true." She stepped forward, only slightly. "Then why do you always leave the room when I walk in?" His voice caught. "Because I can't breathe when I don't." The words hung there, fragile and final. She was inches away now. He could see the rise and fall of her chest, the faint flush on her cheeks. Her eyes didn't flinch. Henry didn't move. And then, slowly, Elira reached up and touched the side of his face. Just her fingertips. A question asked without words. He didn't answer it. Not with words. He leaned forward, slow, measured, unsure. Their lips met like a breath being held too long. Soft, cautious, as if touching would make it real, and neither of them was ready for what that meant. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't desperation. It was years of imagined closeness pulled into one impossible moment. Her hand rested lightly on his neck. His fingers brushed her waist. Nothing urgent, just two people holding something they never thought they'd be allowed to feel. And just as quickly as it began, it ended. Elira stepped back first, eyes wide, breath quick. "This can't happen," she said, voice unsteady. Henry nodded, though everything inside him protested. "I know." Neither moved. Neither spoke. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, towel still in hand. He stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. The next morning, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. Breakfast was served on the patio. Celeste returned from the city in better spirits, her voice lively, as she spoke about the fundraiser turnout and the senator's speech. She complimented Elira's choice in earrings, kissed Henry on the cheek, made jokes about summer brunches and the importance of small weddings. And Henry? He smiled, answered questions, stirred sugar into his tea, but he didn't taste anything. Every sound was too sharp, every moment too slow. His thoughts replayed the night before on a loop, the closeness, the warmth of her fingers, the way she said this can't happen, and still looked like she didn't mean it. Across the table, Elira sipped orange juice and kept her gaze fixed on a magazine she wasn't reading. She didn't speak to him, not even a glance. That told him everything. She wasn't just avoiding the moment, she was erasing it. For the next 3 days, Elira vanished into her own corners of the estate. She ate breakfast early or late, took long walks alone, painted in silence. The garden house lights stayed on late into the night, but the door remained shut. Henry tried to focus on business, hoping the comfort of logic would quiet the noise in his head. It didn't. Even in meetings and email threads, he found himself drifting, seeing her face in his mind, replaying the feel of her hand at his neck, wondering what might have happened if she hadn't pulled away. But mostly, he wondered what she felt. Was it regret? Was it longing he wasn't allowed to name? On the 5th evening, he found her on the back steps after dinner. She was seated with her knees drawn up, sketchbook in her lap, the pages blank. He stood there for a moment before speaking. "You've been avoiding me." She didn't look up. "You've been easy to avoid. I didn't plan for it to happen." Alira closed the sketchbook slowly. "Of course you didn't. That's what makes it worse." Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "We were tired. We were alone. We let something happen we shouldn't have. That doesn't make it mean something." Henry stepped closer. "Doesn't it?" Finally, she looked at him. "I won't be the reason my sister's life falls apart." He didn't respond. He didn't have an argument, because he knew what they'd done was wrong. But that didn't make the ache any less real. That night, he couldn't sleep. He got out of bed and wandered downstairs, restless. He stopped by the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, stared at its contents for too long, then closed it again without taking anything. As he turned to leave, he froze. Alira stood in the hallway, wearing a navy robe, her hair slightly damp. Her face was unreadable. Neither of them moved. This time, he spoke first. "I can't stop thinking about it." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "You can't say that to me," she said quietly. "Why?" "Because it makes it harder to stay away." His voice softened. "Is that what you're doing?" Alira looked at him with something raw behind her eyes. "I'm trying." The next morning, she was gone. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Had to clear my head. Taking a few days. No forwarding address. No explanation." Celeste barely blinked. "She does that sometimes," she said, buttering toast. "Artists and their moods." But Henry knew. It wasn't about art. It was about them. He spent the rest of the week surrounded by guests and conversations that felt like static. And yet every time his phone buzzed, his heart skipped. Every time the door opened, he looked up too quickly. But there was no message, no return, only silence. Henry stared at his reflection. Morning light spilled through the bathroom blinds, slicing across the polished sink, the cold tile, the steam slowly fading from the mirror. He looked rested, clean-shaven, dressed for a conference call in a dark gray shirt with cufflinks chosen by his assistant. To anyone else, he looked like himself. But something inside him had fractured. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. The way she looked before she walked out. The sound of her voice when she said she wouldn't be the one to break Celeste. He had heard those words before. Not in real life, but in his thoughts, his guilt, his shame. Over and over. Celeste was still in bed when he left the room, curled under the duvet, phone in hand, scrolling through floral arrangements and wedding mood boards. She waved at him as he grabbed his bag. "I'll text you about cake tastings later," she said with a smile. He nodded. Henry drove toward the office, but didn't take the exit. He kept going. By midday, he was walking through the sculpture wing of the new Whitney. Alone. No security, no fanfare. Just the silence of unfinished stone and light filtering through high windows. He needed space. Not the kind defined by square footage, but the kind that let him breathe without explanation. He checked his phone again. Nothing. No messages, no missed calls. Not from her. She had been gone almost 2 weeks. He'd convinced himself it would be easier this way, that if she left it would force clarity, but instead it left a vacuum. His mind wandered constantly. Was she painting again? Did she think about him? Did she regret the kiss? Or had she been relieved to leave it all behind? That night, he found a canvas delivered to his apartment. It had no note, no signature, just a small silver ribbon tied around the frame. He knew immediately. It was hers. The painting was of a man, seated on a bench in a field of winter grass, his back turned to the viewer, his shoulders hunched, his hands clasped. The sky above him a heavy blend of muted colors. Behind him, barely visible, was a figure walking away, carrying something in her arms. It wasn't just art. It was a message. He called her the next morning. It rang once, then again. No answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. 3 days later, he returned to the estate. Celeste welcomed him with a kiss on the cheek. Finally, she smiled. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned us." Henry gave a polite laugh. "Just needed space to think." "Well, don't overdo it," she said lightly. "We've got tastings and dress fittings next week." He nodded. As they walked up the gravel path, she slipped her arm into his. She didn't notice the tension in his body, or if she did, she ignored it. But when they passed the garden, he paused. The studio door was open. A curtain fluttered. Celeste followed his gaze. "She came back yesterday," she said. Henry's chest tightened. "She hasn't really said much," Celeste added, "but she seems quieter. I think she's still mad at me for something I don't know I did." Henry said nothing. That evening, after dinner, he slipped away. The sun was low, casting warm streaks of gold through the trees as he walked through the hedge-lined path to the garden house. He stood at the threshold, unsure if he should knock. Elira opened the door before he could decide. She didn't smile. She didn't look away either. "Hi," he said. "Hi." Neither of them moved. Then she stepped aside. He walked in. The garden house hadn't changed. Same scent of worn paper and paint. Same quiet pull. Henry stepped inside, and for the first time in weeks he exhaled. Elira sat near the window, her knees drawn to her chest, sketchbook in hand. She didn't speak right away, and neither did he. There was nothing urgent in the air. No accusation, no apology. Just presence. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly. "I wasn't sure you'd let me." Elira closed the sketchbook and set it aside. "I shouldn't have sent the painting," she added. "It wasn't fair." "No," he said. "But it was honest." She nodded once, eyes down. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she admitted. Henry crossed the room and sat in the worn chair opposite her. "Neither do I." That became the beginning of something they didn't try to name. Every evening, once the house quieted and Celeste turned in, Henry would make his way back through the hedges. The path between the life he had and the life he couldn't touch. Inside the studio, they spoke without filters. He told her how he couldn't sleep, how his mind never stopped running circles around what he felt and what he owed, how he was starting to question whether he'd ever really loved Celeste, or if he just loved the idea of what loving her solved. Elira didn't offer comfort. She didn't stroke his ego. She listened, and when she did speak, it was only the truth. "I think you've been lying to yourself longer than you've been lying to her," she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. And somehow, that didn't feel like judgment. It felt like release. They didn't touch again. Not physically, but every moment stretched thin with the weight of what was unsaid, with the ache of everything they had no right to feel, and no strength to stop. They walked together in the early hours, down to the old lakeside cabin the sisters used to play in as children. They sat in the rose garden beneath the trellis, listening to the crickets and the hush of the breeze. They never stayed long. They always left before they couldn't. One night, Henry stayed longer than he meant to. Too long. The moon hung low. The wind was still. He sat beside her, staring at a half-finished piece she was working on. "It's us, isn't it?" he asked quietly. The painting was abstract, but clear if you knew what to look for. Two figures turned away from each other, but their shadows leaning inward. "It's what we feel," she answered. "Not what we are." He nodded, the words catching in his throat. He stood, brushing his palms on his slacks. "I should go," but he didn't move. She rose too. They stood close, breath shared, space shrinking. Elira looked at him, tired and open. "You're getting married." "I know." "Then don't make this harder." Henry took a step back. "Have you ever felt like you're living a version of your life that doesn't belong to you?" he asked. Elira's expression didn't shift, but her answer came quickly. "Yes," she said. "Every day I'm near you." Have you ever felt caught between doing what's expected and following what your heart aches for? If you've ever stood at that kind of crossroads, this story is for you. Tap the like button if you've lived that tension, and don't forget to share it with someone who understands what it's like to love in silence. She began pulling away, not with dramatic gestures or confrontational silence, but with small absences, fewer late-night walks, quieter evenings in the studio, less eye contact, less laughter. Henry noticed immediately. She still let him in, but never for long. Conversations that once flowed now staggered. Her responses were measured. She drew boundaries with soft words, not walls, but they held all the same. One evening as he entered the studio with coffee in hand, she didn't meet him at the door. He found her near the window, cleaning her brushes slowly, deliberately. Her back was turned. "I thought you weren't coming tonight," he said. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be." That answer sat between them, heavy. He placed the coffee down beside her. "Alira, don't," she said, still not facing him. "We keep pretending there's a version of this that doesn't hurt someone, but there isn't." She finally turned. Her expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was tired. Fractured. "I can't be the shadow you come to when you're tired of pretending," she said. "And I can't keep loving someone who's walking down an aisle toward another woman." Henry stepped forward. "It's not that simple." "No, Henry," she cut in gently but firmly. "It's exactly that simple." That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, Celeste's soft breathing beside him, guilt curling like smoke in his chest. He thought of Alira, not just her voice or her eyes, but her silence, her restraint, her refusal to destroy her sister, even when she could have easily blamed it all on him. He hated how much he admired her for that. He hated how much more that made him love her. Days passed. The wedding date loomed closer. Celeste had begun selecting music for the ceremony. She asked Henry what kind of flowers he preferred for the lapel. He said white because it was the only color he could think of that didn't feel like lying. Alira kept her distance, but her absence was louder than her presence had ever been. One afternoon, Henry found a note slipped under his study door. Just 5 words. "The studio is yours now." He read it twice. The third time, he didn't finish. He crumpled it in his fist and walked out the door. He found her in the rose garden. She was alone on the bench near the back gate, sunlight catching in her hair, face calm but unreadable. She didn't look up when he approached. Didn't move. "I'm calling it off," he said. Alira's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. He sat down beside her, hands clasped. "I don't know what comes after that. I don't have a plan. I just know I can't keep doing this." She turned to face him. Her voice barely carried. "I didn't ask you to call it off. I know. I don't want to be the reason something falls apart. You're not. It was already falling apart. You just helped me see it." The garden was quiet. Just the sound of bees and the faint breeze against the petals. He looked at her, not with desperation, but with clarity. "Whatever happens next, I need it to be real." Alira closed her eyes, then said, quietly, "Real comes with consequences." "I'll take them," he whispered. She was gone. No warning, no confrontation, no farewell whispered under breath or scribbled on paper. Just absence. Her room was still made. The coffee cup still rested beside the easel. Her suitcase, once half unpacked, had vanished. Henry stood at the garden house doorway for nearly 5 minutes before stepping inside. It smelled the same, linseed oil, old wood, and her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. He ran his hand over the chair where she used to sit. It still held the impression of presence, though the woman herself had disappeared. Henry didn't speak. He didn't rage. He didn't beg. He just stood still. Celeste didn't notice anything different. Or maybe she chose not to. The wedding plans continued like clockwork. Her mother hosted brunches. Her father arranged media opportunities. Everything was on schedule. Henry said yes to whatever was asked. His suit was fitted. His vows drafted. His smile performed. But something behind his eyes had emptied. He showed up. He listened. He held Celeste's hand when appropriate, answered reporters with practiced confidence, and toasted champagne toasts with a man who would one day be his father-in-law. But every time he walked past the garden house, something cracked deeper. The doors remained shut now. The light no longer spilled out at night. And yet, he still glanced toward it, out of reflex, out of punishment, out of hope. He had no idea where she went, no clue what pushed her to leave without a word. He only knew that something inside him had followed her out the door and hadn't returned. Weeks passed. Henry went through motions. He sat through meetings, delivered speeches, approved contracts. His assistant told him he was behind on board reviews. He nodded. He didn't care. The only thing he could remember with any clarity was the last time he saw her. The note, the bench, the moment they both knew nothing could stay the same. Some nights he sat on that same bench, in the same spot where she told him consequences mattered more than want. He replayed her voice in his mind, again and again, not the words, but the tone, the sadness beneath the surface, the strength it took her to walk away. She'd been right. Of course she had. She hadn't run because she was afraid of what they had. She ran because she knew he wasn't ready to carry it. 3 weeks after she left, a letter arrived. No return address, no phone number, just a postmark from the Pacific Northwest and handwriting he would recognize anywhere. Inside was a single page. "I'm safe. Please don't look for me. I need time. There are things I have to figure out alone. I hope you find peace in whatever path you choose. E." He sat in his study with the note in his hand for over an hour. Then he folded it, placed it in the top drawer, and locked it. Not to forget, but to remember where the ache lived. She hadn't meant to leave that way. She told herself she would say goodbye, face him one last time, offer something resembling closure. But when the hour came, her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her words dissolved before reaching paper. So she left before sunrise, one bag, one sketchbook, and a head full of everything she couldn't bring herself to say. The further she got from the estate, the lighter she felt, at first. But the silence that followed wasn't freedom. It was a different kind of weight, one she didn't know how to carry yet. The nausea started 3 weeks later. She chalked it up to travel stress, dehydration, irregular sleep, but deep down, she knew. The signs weren't subtle. Her body had already started whispering the truth long before she dared speak it out loud. She bought a test in a gas station bathroom in Colorado. She didn't look at it for 5 minutes. When she finally turned it over, her hands went cold. 2 lines. No noise, no tears. Just the world narrowing to a pinpoint of truth. By the time she reached Oregon, the air smelled different. The city was smaller. The people didn't recognize her name. She found a short-term rental near the edge of a wooded park and unpacked slowly, as if she were afraid the walls might reject her. She didn't tell anyone. Not Henry. Not Celeste. Not her parents. Because what could she say that wouldn't break someone else in the process? So she kept the secret. Protected it. Let it grow in silence. The first few weeks were strange. She walked the neighborhood in long, quiet loops. Found a small cafe where she could sketch for hours without being interrupted. Slowly, her appetite returned. So did the stillness in her hands. She began painting again, privately, not the heavy, shadowed portraits she'd done in New York. Something simpler, smaller, gentle shapes, colors that didn't demand attention. She painted a child before she let herself believe she was having one. And when she did, it changed everything. She went to her first checkup alone. The nurse asked if she had someone who could join her. Alira said, "Not today," and smiled like it didn't sting. She heard the heartbeat for the first time and covered her mouth with both hands. That night, she cried for hours. Not because she was scared, not even because she was alone, but because for the first time since she left, she knew why she had to. She found a small space on the corner of a quiet street, a storefront with big windows and a back room perfect for storage. She painted the walls herself, signed the lease, and opened a modest art studio with a chalkboard sign that read, "Open when inspiration strikes." She didn't hang her name on the door, didn't seek out press or collectors, but little by little, people wandered in. Tourists, locals, teachers on lunch break, children with wide eyes and busy hands. She taught classes once a week, painted commissions only when they felt right, and she let her belly grow, slowly, quietly, without apology. In the stillness of her new life, she began to understand something no one ever taught her. You don't have to be visible to belong. And you don't have to be loud to matter. One day, while organizing brushes near the window, she looked up and caught her reflection in the glass. Her face softer, her expression quieter. Her hand settled on her stomach with a tenderness she hadn't known she was capable of. She whispered to the child inside her, "I don't know what we're building yet, but I know it's worth everything we left behind." Henry had stopped looking. At least, that's what he told himself. Months had passed since the wedding was called off. Celeste ended it with a calm finality that didn't match the devastation it deserved. No screaming, no slamming doors, just a long silence, followed by the softest sentence he'd ever heard. "You were never really here." And she was right. The press did what the press does, speculated, questioned, assigned blame. But the noise faded quickly. A new tech scandal took its place. Someone else got engaged. The world moved on. Henry didn't. He resigned from Linwell 2 weeks later. No speech. No press release. Just a final boardroom nod and a quiet walk out of the building that once made him feel important. He sold the condo, traded the skyline for open highways, Started a foundation, quietly, under a different name, focused on emerging artists. No interviews, no branding, just funding and silence. It was the first time in years he moved without calculation. The first time he felt like himself. It was in a gallery in Oregon where it happened. He hadn't planned to stop. He was only passing through. The gallery was small. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, dust catching in the light. He nearly walked past it entirely, until he saw the canvas in the window. A cliffside, a man standing at its edge, a child beside him, looking toward the sky. His heart stopped. It was her work. He knew it in his bones. The strokes, the balance, the emotion layered beneath color. He stepped inside, barely breathing. The placard read, Artist E. Alvera Title, beginning again private studio available by appointment. He followed the address listed on the studio card. A short walk. A narrow street lined with trees that curved like they were bowing to protect the silence. He found the door, pushed it open. The bell above chimed, and there she was, back turned, same profile, same stillness in her frame. On the floor beside her, a toddler hummed softly to himself, stacking small blocks in crooked towers. Henry stood frozen. Elira turned. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Her eyes widened, not in fear, just recognition. A soft exhale, 1,000 unspoken things between them. He took one step forward. Is he? She nodded. His name is Luca. The boy looked up at the sound of his name. Dark curls, thoughtful eyes, a quiet calm that mirrored everything Henry had once seen in his own reflection. Henry dropped to his knees, not in drama, but because his legs gave out. He couldn't look away from the boy, couldn't breathe around the weight in his chest. I didn't tell you, Elira said softly, because I didn't know what kind of man you were becoming. I didn't want to bind you to something you didn't choose. He looked up at her. His voice trembled. You and Luca are the only thing I want to choose now. She didn't rush into his arms. She didn't say I've missed you or I love you. She simply watched him with quiet caution, the kind mothers learn quickly. And yet, her hand didn't shake when she reached for his. He stood slowly, their fingers laced together. Luca reached up between them. 3 hands touching now. A new beginning. Quiet, unfinished, whole. It wasn't the kind of gallery people talked about in magazines. No champagne at the door. No collectors in polished shoes murmuring about composition and provenance. It was quiet, personal, the kind of place you only found by accident. Henry almost kept walking. He only stopped because of the painting in the window. There was something about it, still but powerful. It didn't shout. It waited. A cliff that dropped off into a horizon painted in muted, aching blues. A man stood near the edge, one hand resting lightly on the shoulder of a small child. The figures were vague, more suggestion than detail, but Henry felt it instantly. He stepped closer. The child was looking up, not down, hope, not fear. The man beside him, his posture was stiff, tired, but not lost. Henry stood there for a long time. He didn't hear the city noise behind him, didn't feel the wind picking up. All he saw was the space between the two figures, and how it somehow mirrored the space in his chest he hadn't known how to name. Then he read the placard, Artist E. Alvera Title. Beginning again, his heart stilled. It didn't pound, didn't race. It just stopped, like it needed a second to understand it was real. The address was handwritten on a small studio card near the register. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions, just handed it to him with a kind smile and said, She's usually there in the mornings. Henry left before he could talk himself out of it. The studio door was propped open. It was small, modest, lived in. Canvases leaned against the walls, a few still drying. Light poured in through wide windows. There was no reception desk, no display. Just a table with an open sketchbook, a few scattered pencils, and a single paint-streaked chair. And her. Elira stood at the far end of the room, sorting through a box of supplies. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, tied back loosely. She wore jeans and a faded navy shirt rolled to her elbows. Her posture was relaxed, grounded, unafraid. She hadn't seen him yet. But beside her, on the floor, a small boy sat cross-legged, piecing together a wooden puzzle with serious focus. Henry didn't speak. He couldn't. His body moved before his thoughts caught up. One step, then another. The door made the faintest sound as it opened wider, and Alira turned. The moment their eyes met, time shifted. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to speak. She just looked at him, not with fear, not even with shock, but with a depth that said she had played this moment in her mind 100 times and still didn't know what to do with it. Henry stepped forward. His voice cracked on the first word. Alira. She blinked once. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak. He glanced down at the boy, who had now turned to look at him with wide, curious eyes. Is he? Alira nodded. His name is Luca. Henry dropped to his knees, carefully, slowly, as if afraid the floor might fall out from under him. The boy stared, tilting his head the way children do when they're trying to make sense of something unspoken. Henry reached out, not touching, just holding his hand close, as if proximity alone was an apology. Alira's voice was quiet. I didn't tell you, because I didn't know what you would do, and I needed to protect him from being someone's second thought. He didn't look at her yet. He looked at Luca, and in the boy's face he saw it. The eyes, the shape of the brow, the small dimple that appeared when the boy raised his eyebrows, puzzled. It wasn't just likeness. It was blood, and something deeper, something sacred. When he finally stood, he turned to Alira. His voice was steady now, low but clear. I left everything. Her eyes didn't narrow. They didn't soften either. I didn't come here to fix anything, he continued. I didn't come here because I want you to rearrange your life to fit me back into it. He paused. I came because you and Luca are the only life I want now. She didn't speak right away. He could see the wall in her eyes, the one she'd built for survival, not spite. But she didn't ask him to leave. She didn't move away. Instead, she reached down and picked up a small toy block that Luca had dropped. Her hand brushed Henry's as she passed it back to the boy. A pause. A quiet. Not forgiveness, but maybe the first breath of it. Henry didn't ask to stay. He didn't offer apologies packaged in promises. He didn't demand explanations or bring up the past like a ledger in need of balancing. Instead, he showed up the next morning, and the one after that, always at the same time. Quiet. Steady. He'd pick up a broom or stack canvases or bring a fresh coffee with her name written carefully on the lid. He never lingered too long. Never tried to force conversation. Just showed up. Luca, cautious at first, grew curious. By day 3, he sat a little closer to Henry on the studio floor. By day 5, he handed him a crayon. By the end of the week, Henry was helping him paint a cardboard rocket, messy and bright and nowhere near perfect, but full of joy. Alira watched from her stool, brush paused mid-stroke, a weight pressing. Into her chest she hadn't allowed herself to feel for over a year. It wasn't the act of parenting that shook her. It was how natural it looked on him, how no part of it felt like performance. He didn't talk about fatherhood. He simply did it, like it was instinct, like he'd been waiting his whole life to arrive at this version of himself. They didn't talk about what had happened that summer, not at first, but the silence between them was different now. Not heavy, not evasive, just waiting for the right time. One evening, she found him fixing the front steps of the studio with a borrowed hammer. The boards had been loose since she moved in. She always meant to repair them, but never made the time. He didn't ask. He just did it. When the final board was in place, he sat beside her on the porch. Luca was asleep inside, soft music playing from the little speaker she kept near his crib. The air was cool. The light had dipped into soft amber. Henry turned to her. I didn't know how much I didn't know, he said, eyes forward. She didn't interrupt. I thought I had everything mapped out. The job, the image, the marriage, even love. It was something I convinced myself I'd earned just by showing up. A pause. But with you, it wasn't about showing up. It was about being seen. His voice dropped lower, and I was afraid of that, because I didn't even know who I was back then. He turned to her finally. But I know now. Alira met his gaze. There was no rush to forgive. She was still the same woman who had once walked away to protect what mattered most, but she was also tired of carrying it alone. You're not the same man, she said. But I'm not the same woman either. He nodded. Then maybe we don't have to pretend we're picking up where we left off. She tilted her head slightly. No. We start from here. The next day, she handed him a studio key. It wasn't a declaration. It was trust, quiet, hard-earned, and sacred, and he understood the weight of it. He didn't say thank you. He just took it and held it like a vow. Lucas started calling him Cass 2 weeks later, not because anyone told him to. It was his own version, soft, easy, innocent. Henry didn't correct him. He just smiled like his world had finally taken its first real breath. What would you do if you found out you had a child you never knew about? Would you run, freeze, or rise? Share your thoughts with us, and if this story's touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Ross' Story Trail. Some stories are meant to be felt and remembered. Henry never tried to win her back with speeches. He didn't bring roses, no declarations, no dramatics. Instead, he fixed the things no one else noticed. The back porch that creaked in the middle, the studio door that stuck when it rained, the grocery list on the fridge he added to without asking. Every repair he made, every small gesture, was quiet evidence. I see what matters to you. I want to care for it too. He didn't rush. He let Alira set the pace. Sometimes she kept her distance. Other days, she sat with him in the garden while Luca chased dandelions. The silence between them was no longer strained. It had matured, become gentle, filled with unspoken understanding. Henry learned the rhythm of their home, Luca's sleepy habits, Alira's fondness for mint tea in the evening, the way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. He didn't ask for anything in return, but slowly, the warmth in her eyes returned, bit by bit. One day, while sanding down an old window frame, Luca approached with a question Henry would never forget. Are you going to stay? Henry paused, brushing dust from his fingers. He crouched to meet the boy's eyes. If your mama says yes, I'd like to. Luca considered it, then handed him a small wooden toy soldier, worn and chipped. You can borrow him, but give him back. Henry's throat tightened. I promise. Alira watched from inside the house, and though she said nothing, she turned back to her painting with tears she didn't let fall. By mid-autumn, the leaves had turned to a burnt gold. The air held a softness only the in-between seasons know. Henry spent a morning carving something in the shed, a small piece of wood he'd saved from the porch repairs. It wasn't fancy, but it was careful. A ring, sanded smooth, shaped by his own hands. He'd carved a tiny pattern into its edges, a simple design inspired by Luca's drawing on the fridge. 2 trees standing side by side, their roots tangled. It wasn't a symbol of perfection. It was a symbol of choosing someone, flaws, cracks, past and all. The leaves whispered that day, not loudly, not in gusts, just soft rustling through the trees as Henry waited beneath them, hands slightly trembling despite everything he'd practiced in his head. The clearing behind the house, the one Alira had once used for plein air painting, was quiet now. No easels, no distractions, just orange and gold leaves scattered like a blanket. The world dipped in warmth. Henry looked down at the small wooden ring in his hand, still stained faintly from the polish he'd used that morning. He heard footsteps, not hurried, steady. Alira walked into the clearing with Luca at her side, holding her hand. They weren't dressed up. They weren't expecting anything. That was the point. Henry bent down and opened his palm. Luca's eyes lit up. You finished it. He nodded. Think your mama might like it? Luca looked up at Alira with a grin. It's way better than the ones in stores. Alira raised an eyebrow. What is this? Henry stood. No stage, no theatrics, just heart. I don't want a perfect love, he said. I've lived in polished spaces, with polished expectations, and none of it ever felt like home. He held out the ring. I want the kind that gets messy, that needs work, that takes showing up again and again, the kind that leaves your hands full of sawdust but your chest full of peace. Her breath caught. He stepped closer. You and Luca are the first thing in my life I've chosen not for appearances, not for control, but because I can't imagine a future that makes sense without you in it. He glanced at the boy, then back to her. I don't need headlines. I don't need back pages. I need this. Us. Our mornings. Our small. Our real. Alira looked down at the ring. It wasn't even round in places, but it was shaped with care, with patience, with presence. She took it gently, holding it like it could bruise. Then she looked back at him. I don't know if I can promise forever, she said, but I can promise I'll keep showing up too. Henry nodded. His eyes were glassy. That's all I've ever wanted. Luca clapped. Can I be the ring guy? They laughed, together, not because life was easy, but because the hardest parts were finally being met with something soft. That evening, they didn't throw a celebration. No music, no candles, just the three of them sitting on the steps of their home, wrapped in quiet. Luca leaned into Henry's side. Elira leaned into his shoulder, and for the first time in a long, long time, it felt like everything had finally found its place. Closing reflection, lessons in love and legacy. Henry never returned to the boardroom. He never reclaimed his old empire, because what he found was greater than legacy and headlines. He found a boy who called him in the middle of the night when dreams got too loud, a woman who laughed like forgiveness, a home where silence didn't mean emptiness, it meant peace. They didn't chase a perfect life. They built one from what was broken, and every day they chose to keep building. Love isn't a clean line. Sometimes it begins in complication, sometimes it hurts before it heals. But when rooted in truth, humility, and grace, it becomes the one thing worth fighting for. Because love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other, even after everything, especially after everything. If this story touched something in you, share it. Send it to someone who believes in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Ross' Story Trail, because the best stories aren't the ones that end perfectly. They're the ones that grow. The mornings were different now. No buzzing phones, no frantic meetings, no faces waiting for decisions behind glass doors. Just the soft hum of birdsong through an open window, the scent of brewing, coffee, and the warmth of small feet padding across a wooden floor. Henry sat cross-legged on a patchwork rug, two tiny bodies curled against him, Luca on one side, and his younger twin sisters nestled against the other. He held an old storybook in one hand, his voice quiet, steady. Elira painted in the corner, her canvas catching the golden light pouring through the curtains. A half-finished scene bloomed beneath her brush, a man, two children, and a woman, beneath an arch of trees surrounded by color. This was their boardroom now. These were his greatest titles: father, partner, builder of ordinary joy. And none of it made headlines. Outside, the garden hummed with late summer life. The wooden swing Henry built hung from a sturdy beam, creaking faintly in the breeze. A laundry line danced nearby, dotted with tiny shirts and floral onesies. There were no cameras, no investors, just the steady rhythm of real life. Henry had once chased legacy with a fire so loud it nearly consumed him. He'd been a name, a symbol, a man defined by control. Now he was a father with dish soap on his sleeves and clay stuck under his nails from helping Luca with school projects. He was a man who could make pancakes one-handed while holding a baby in the other. He was a man whose hands had once written multi-million-dollar contracts but now braided Elira's hair on quiet Sunday mornings. And somehow, that felt more powerful. Sometimes he still thought about the past, about who he used to be. The sharp suits, the sterile penthouse, the way success had once felt like survival. But those memories didn't hurt anymore. They just reminded him of what he never wanted to return to, because in letting go of everything he thought he needed, he finally found what truly mattered. Luca pulled at his sleeve. Again, the boy whispered. Henry smiled. One more chapter. The twins, now drowsy, breathed softly against his sides. Elira turned from her canvas and smiled at the scene, her family safe and close and loved. And in that stillness, the kind only truth can build, Henry whispered, not to them, but perhaps to himself. Love isn't a perfect path. Sometimes it begins where it shouldn't. Sometimes it hurts before it heals. But when we stop running from the truth, when we own our mistakes, choose to show up and build brick by brick, that's when love becomes legacy. This story was never about scandal. It was never about power. It was about choosing love, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. It was about a man who once had everything except the one thing he needed most: a home full of laughter, and the chance to be called daddy by two tiny voices, who didn't care about his past, only that he stayed. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Subscribe to Mr. Ross' Story Trail, where every story reminds us that redemption is always possible. Love is not about perfection. It was never meant to be clean, polished, or without fault. Real love shows up in the cracks, in the quiet moments between mistakes and forgiveness. It doesn't wear armor. It doesn't follow a rule book. It bends, it breaks, it weeps. And still, it finds its way back. Henry Aldridge lived a life that looked perfect on the outside. He had status, influence, respect, but beneath it all was a man aching for something deeper, something honest. He didn't set out to betray anyone. He didn't plan to fall in love with the one person he knew he shouldn't. But that's the truth about the heart. It doesn't ask for permission. It whispers, then it roars. And once it's awake, it refuses to sleep. This wasn't a story of betrayal. It was a story of rebirth, of realizing that the life we build for appearances is no substitute for the life we long for in the dark. Henry could have stayed comfortable. He could have played the part, married the woman everyone expected, lived in quiet misery while the world applauded. But he chose differently. And in choosing differently, he lost nearly everything: status, certainty, safety. But in return, he found something rare: a woman who challenged him, a son who softened him, and later, 2 daughters who called him by a name no title ever could, Dad. Alira didn't chase romance. She walked away when it cost too much. She bore her burden in silence, choosing peace over chaos. She raised her child with quiet strength and never once looked back for applause. That's love too. The kind that protects instead of demands. The kind that waits instead of controls. Their story was tangled. It was painful. It broke people. But in time, it also healed. Because love, real love, isn't the absence of scars. It's the decision to keep showing up, scarred and all. To choose each other again and again. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's hard. Even when it's not the version of life you imagined. What matters is who stands beside you when the dust settles. Who rebuilds with you. Who stays. Who makes the ordinary feel sacred again. Love isn't a headline. It's a hand reaching for yours after everything has fallen apart. So if you've ever loved in a way that scared you, if you've ever walked away from comfort to chase truth, if you've ever fought for something real when everything else said not to, then this story belongs to you. Because sometimes the most powerful kind of love isn't the perfect kind. It's the one we're brave enough to choose again and again and again.